And when I came to, on the outside of my knees, perfectly in the clouds, there were these two angel wings right outside my knees. And I saw this hawk circling around and circling around. And it went up so far high into the clouds, into these angel wings until I couldn't see it anymore.
Hey, soul family. Welcome to the Alive and Awake podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kay, and I have spent the last 20 years teaching people how to work with their wounds and overcome their greatest fears so they can learn how to thrive in a world where they were only taught to conform. Each week, we will dive deep into the practical, the spiritual, and the mystical so I can teach you how to do the inner work to know yourself, trust yourself, and eventually love yourself enough to create a world where you feel fully alive, awake, and free. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode. Ready? Let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode, everyone. I am really excited to share this next topic with you. Spirit has been really doing a work in me to figure out how to say what I need to say, how to communicate what's on my mind, and how to use my story to tell people about the three phases of spiritual expansion that each soul goes through if they are on a unique path here in this human life. And my guess is that if you're listening to this and if you relate to me and that if you've listened to some of my stuff so far, then yes, that is you and you are also on that journey. So I didn't have anybody teaching me about any of these things when I was going through the deepest, darkest parts of my life. So I feel like it's incredibly important for you to know what it is that your soul chose for you to go through so that you can get through it without continuing to repeat patterns, sabotage yourself, hate yourself, doubt yourself, and wonder what this life is all about. So we're going to really discuss the three themes that I came up with that each soul goes through that has a unique purpose to fulfill here on earth. So the first phase is spiritual amnesia. The second phase is spiritual activation. The third phase is spiritual awakening. And I would even say that there's a fourth phase of literally being awake and enlightened in this world. However, we'll save the fourth phase for another episode so you can understand what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. So, as I said, the first phase of your journey is the first half of your life that most people in the spiritual community call spiritual amnesia. Now, this is a divinely orchestrated time for you essentially to be asleep and not remember anything spiritual and that you are a spiritual being. Some people do come into this world having access to all of their spiritual gifts and all of their psychic gifts right away, but most likely that's not you. And if that is you, then you also went through a lot of things because you're still faced with developing an ego. And this actually is meant to happen. And what your soul chose as a divine plan with God and with all of the people in your life before you incarnated into form. And so there is a period where you do develop a personality self that actually is meant for you to accumulate and to experience all of the karma, all the intergenerational wounds, all of the addictive patterns that you chose to come here and overcome. Now, this is a very, very tumultuous time because its whole purpose is you feeling separate from God, separate from source, and separate from essentially unconditional love. Oftentimes, we are born into families of origin who cannot meet this for us because they have their own wounding and they can't give us the love of God, of Christ, that our soul ultimately craves. But that actually is done on purpose. And the reason is because we're meant to seek out that path or seek out that love later in life. And so the first half of your life, which usually goes into like mid 20s, like late 20s, sometimes early 30s, where you essentially are like living life as just a human being, where you are having to experience this world of form, or what I call like the people call the 3D reality, right? It's like anything that I do, anything that happens to me creates more wounding. And you're constantly trying to figure out, do I fit in? Do I feel normal? Am I loved? Is this right? Is this right? Is this wrong? Is that wrong? I feel guilty if I'm not living correctly. And you're constantly seeking for validation from the external world. And you're in a constant comparison mode to see where you fit in and who you are and why you're here, because your ultimate desire is to fit in, to belong, and to be accepted. And so you develop these parts of your personality that start to form that essentially protect you from rejection or protect you from fear, where it's the parts of you that face front. Like we have certain perfectionist parts or people pleasing parts of our personality, or parts that kind of like manage how the outer world perceives us, which I'll actually do another podcast on. This is a little bit of internal family system stuff. And then we have other parts of us that put out our emotion, that hide how we're feeling from the world so that we can appear normal and be accepted, all to hide the wounding that the inner child accumulated in the first half of our life. And so we go through life playing out these roles and wearing these masks in order to essentially make our mark on the world and to develop families, to develop careers, to earn an income, to have some fun, to play, to be able to do what we want in life. And I call it like the 3D matrix, right? Like to fit in with the 3D world of form we all go through. And we all have an immense amount of suffering inside that we try to hide from the world because we don't want anybody to see that we are weak. We don't want to show vulnerability. We don't want to feel like that we're not normal or that we're crazy. And our primary source of functioning in this phase is to like seek out the love that we need that we didn't get, and to seek out validation from the external world to see where we fit. So it is a very outward, egocentric focused process the first half of our life. That's why we call it spiritual amnesia, because we have no idea that we're even connected to something that's greater than us, that is guiding our life at all times. And if you grew up like in religion, then my guess is that if you did have a sense of something bigger than you, then that God or that source was a source of like punishment, of judgment, and of shame. And so you didn't want to step out of line and live wrongly, or you would go to hell, or you would be condemned. Or the story goes that you're constantly evaluating yourself to see if you're good enough for this world or good enough for God to love you, which is complete bullshit, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so essentially, there's this deep, deep longing to fit in and to be loved by God, your creator, the source. And oftentimes, addictive patterns start to develop in this phase because you are doing your best to hide how you really feel, right? There's like master escapism, there's numbing, there's avoiding, there's tons of the usually like partying in this phase and like saying fuck it all, and not necessarily caring about throwing it all away, because you're just trying to manage day to day. And in this phase, you are literally going through survival mode. You're trying to survive the day. You're trying to manage the kids. You're trying to manage your body. You're trying to manage your spouse or your husband. You're just trying to get through, and you're doing the best you can. And it usually comes with like a lot of burnout. It usually comes with a lot of exhaustion. It usually comes with a lot of anger or repressed rage that then we like tend to explode, or we like lose it on our loved ones. Like we feel so disconnected because we're disconnected from our heart, because we built these walls around it with our wounding, that we don't let anybody in, and we certainly don't know how to give it out. So if you're in this phase, know that it is all part of a divine plan that your soul chose for you to experience, right? Like your higher self and soul said, I am going to come into this earth plane and I'm going to have this mother, have this father, have these family, have this family, have these people, unfortunately, have this trauma so that I can experience what it's like to be in this world in a very human way and have all of these experiences so that later, as I start to wake up to the truth of my divinity, I can heal it, overcome it, and help other people and bring them up through their wounding with my own unique way of doing that in this world. And so, as you start to move into the second phase, which would be spiritual activation. Now, in this phase, I would say this is even more of a tumultuous phase in your life because you're actually starting to wake up to the fact that, like, things that have happened to you were not okay. The way that you've been living has been out of alignment with the calling of your soul. Things start to not feel right to you. You start to question everything and you start to seek out other answers. Where in this phase, you're starting to essentially be activated. When I was going through this phase, I had said, I found Jesus. And it's like, no, 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 no. Jesus found you because I was working at a rape crisis center. I was incredibly burnt out. I was being constantly triggered by my clients' stories because I hadn't yet addressed my wounding from the things that had happened to me in childhood. And I was really struggling. If you listen to my very first episode, this is when I got on my knees and I said, God, if you are real, take this pain from me because I cannot do this on my own anymore. I wasn't living right. I wasn't like feeling right. I was killing my body. I was killing my professional life. I was drinking all the time. I had an eating disorder. I was a hot mess from society standards in this phase, right? And so it was like, I would say that I sought out Jesus for answers, but it's like, no, 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 no. Like this was a divinely orchestrated time for your soul, for this energy to come in and find you. And I started seeing like other people that were really attached to Christ in my workplace, where like one woman would come in and she would constantly be so happy. And I hated her. I couldn't stand the fact that she was a Jesus loving freak in my mind because I was like, no one's that fucking happy all the time. Like, that's bullshit. Like, stay away from me. Like, I don't want anything to do with you. It's fake. It's not real. I don't believe it. I think you're lying. Right. I had a lot of judgment because I couldn't possibly understand how someone could have that level of happiness when this world is shit. Like, I thought this world is a shitty place. Why is anybody here? Why did I even come here? Like, nothing good happens in the world with all the evil that I was seeing and everything that I was exposed to at that time. But slowly, her energy started to work on me and I started to become curious and I started to ask some questions. So I would say this would be like my human self seeking out spiritual answers from the people that were around me. And then I had another woman coming in and she was like so confident in her relationship with God that I was like, she doesn't even question that. Like, what does she have that I don't? And it started to open my mind up to the possibility that there's actually something out there that's bigger than me that actually like helps people feel better or brings them happiness or brings them peace that I certainly did not have in my body. So it started to activate this stuff inside of me. And I started to go into church with a family childhood friend. And I was what would be called like a seeker. I started to read like my very first book on spirituality was called The Shack. And so I read this book and it like opened my mind or my consciousness to like, oh my gosh, like this is actually like a really cool book. Is that true? Is God actually a woman? Like, does God come in different forms? Does God actually care about our feelings? And so it really gave me this curiosity. But because we all have free will and God will never interfere in our lives if we don't welcome it and if we don't ask for help, it really allowed me to see the different aspects of what is possible for people who choose to believe in something greater than them. And it also really started to make me confront the way that I was living and what I was really unhappy with within myself. And what happens is that you get in this phase a major confrontation with your shadows. And this is often where we experience, usually like in our 30s, like early 30s, like, later 30s, almost um, early 40s, where we're faced with our own ego death or dark night of the soul. And I'm not going to say that this is something that I like love seeing people go through, because it comes with such incredible amount of pain, and it really is meant to literally wake you up and put you in such a desperate state that you actually have to seek God for your salvation and for your saving and for answers. And the way that that experience came for me, that I would not wish on anybody, was unfortunately my child being significantly abused in his father's care. And when this happened, I unfortunately found bruises all over him, and CPS was involved, court systems were involved. I gained, full custody overnight. Like, I was forced to, like, excuse my French, like, wake the fuck up to the way that I was living. Because now, not only was I faced with the fact of like, I can't go out every weekend, I no longer have every other weekend custody, I'm forced to do this all on my own. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills. I didn't know how I was going to see clients. I didn't know how I was going to afford daycare. I didn't know how I was going to afford a lawyer to go through all of this. Like, I was in crisis. Not only was I in crisis for the fact that my baby was abused, I was in crisis because I was reliving all of the things that happened to me in my childhood that now happened to my baby. I was a wreck. I had no idea how the hell I was going to get through this. I didn't know who I was going to turn to or who was going to help me. And so I kept diving into the only thing that I knew how, which was like scripture. I didn't want to go back to my old church because I had gotten divorced in that church and I was super embarrassed. And so I just opened my Bible and I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to turn to. I don't know who's going to help me. I don't know. Like, I couldn't, like, sometimes I had to see clients in the evening and I had to find childcare. Like, I was forced to turn outward and count on people to help me that I wasn't prepared for. And so it was a very, very huge dark night of my own soul, an initiation for me to be like, if I'm going to be a full-time single mom, I have got to start living in a way that I can build a life for me and this kid that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be secure, that is safe for him and I. And I really was faced with a lot of my shadows. And the beautiful part of that story is that when I started to speak the things that God said over me through scripture, right? Like, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. I can do anything in Jesus Christ's name. If God be before me, who dare be against me, right? And I like demanded that this shield of protection be forced around me because that's what God said in the Bible. Like, those were his words that he used that said, like, I am a child of God and I will be your protector. I will be your provider. I will be your source of security and I will be your source of safety. And I was like, I don't know what else to do. And so I found a new church. I started speaking the word. I started really diving into my own journey with spirituality. And that's why I call it an activation, because it is meant to put you in a position where you feel so helpless that you are forced to turn to God or something that is bigger than you, whatever you choose to call it, in order to find inner peace and count on something outside of you that is meant to be there for you. And so I started to see spirit working, right? I started to see spirit coming in to reveal to me things that I didn't know was available. I had a friend who linked me with a lawyer. The lawyer decided to take me on pro bono because she felt so sympathetic about my situation. I was able to radically find a daycare for my kid to go into full time after they were already full. And it was like this Montessori program that I thought was amazing, where they did like hands-on work with my kid every single day. They taught him discipline, they taught him self-esteem, they taught him independence. However, I couldn't get him into that program because it was full. And then a week later, I get a phone call saying someone randomly dropped out because they decided to move out of the area. Like that is divine intervention, right? And I also found that I was subletting an office from somebody, and I was seeing clients in the evening because we had joint custody at that point and we shared custody, but I couldn't see my clients in the evening anymore because the father was taken out of the picture, and I was forced to radically change my whole practice. I was like, how my clients, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if they're going to be able to see me during the day. So I found another office to rent out for daytime hours, and I didn't lose one client. They all came with me. So I was trying to manage how to pay my bills, how to have an income, how to see clients, how to support my child, how to be in court, how to deal with CPS. Like it was an awful time in my life. And yet I saw Spirit's hand show up for me time and time and time again. And so my conviction got stronger with how God is always there for me and it's always on my side when I choose to ask for the help and I choose to let that light and let that love in and really stop trying to control it all and to get out of my own way. So these synchronicities started to sync up, and I found a new church where they had like a beautiful daycare program, they had a band. Like I really dove into going to church every single Sunday, like the good Christian that I tried to be. And then eventually what happened is there was this opportunity where I was sitting in the crowd, and I had only felt holy goosebumps one time before that, where I had got on my knees and prayed and said, God, if there is a God out there, like you need to show me. And I felt like that light come in. I felt that activation come in, but I didn't really get it a ton like after that. And then when I was sitting in the pew the one day, I didn't know that it was baptism day, but the pastor had said out in the crowd, if anybody is getting a prompt to be baptized by the light of Christ, and you know if it's you because you'll feel the call inside, then get up and come up here and get baptized in front of the whole congregation. And I felt like, no lie, like my whole body lit up like a Christmas tree. And I was like shaking. I was scared. I was like, I'm not getting up there in front of people and doing this. I don't know what this means. Like, are you nuts? But I did. And so I listened, and I'm in the back and I'm like waiting to go up there. Like my kid is in daycare. No one's there with me, but I just knew, I felt a call in my spirit that this was something I needed to do. And Christians say that it's meant to wash you away, wash the sin away from you. But what I know now on my spiritual path and journey, it wasn't to forgive me of my sin and the bad things that I did. It was to let the light and the love of God come into my body, where I started to remember who I am in truth. And the way that I was sinning was I was forgetting that I was a divine, majestic being and that I'm here on a unique soul mission to serve the planet and wake them up to the truth of their divinity and what is always available when we choose to let that light in and when we choose to seek out something that is greater than us. So when we say like it forgives you of all of your sin or it washes you away from all your sin, what that really means is that you become resurrected into a new form of yourself, living in alignment with your higher self and the life that you chose to co-create with spirit, right? It's so to be resurrected and rebirthed into something new. And I did not know this at the time. It was like a 10-year process for me to start to discover that, which we'll talk about in the next phase. But after I got baptized, it was like things started to shift and things started to change in me, where I was radically confronted with things I just didn't want to be doing anymore, and the ways that I was harming my body or the anger that I had toward my mother or my father. So I started to work on forgiving myself for the way that I had been living that was out of alignment with how I wanted to be in the world and how I wanted to feel about myself. And I started to work on, and I set the intention to forgive the people that hurt me and to forgive the people that harmed me because I didn't want to carry that anger anymore inside my body. My child was constantly triggering me. I was a mom that used to yell all the time because I didn't have control over my emotions. Like I was not at peace inside during my activation phase. And so it really started to work in me to change myself and to really heal the wounding that happened in the first half of my life, right? The sexual abuse, like I had a biological father that used to have sex with women in the bed with me. Talk about feeling completely worthless. No wonder I gave my body away. No wonder I wouldn't stay with the men that treated me well, that wanted to give me love. Like I didn't feel like I was deserving of anything. So during this healing phase, I was forced to confront all of that. And it came with a lot of grief. And it came with a lot of like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I just kept praying. I kept showing up. I kept trying. I kept working at it. And I had an inner resiliency and a determination to figure out what the fuck this life was all about, because I didn't have a clue. And I certainly didn't have anybody around me that had a clue. Right. It forced me to go into my almost like hermit mode and start to work on myself from a very, very like in-depth way. I found spiritual teachers. I found people outside of Christianity. And during this phase, I actually had a reading done by a woman, which I was so scared to have because Christians say that you're not supposed to have readings done. You're not supposed to go and like have anybody meet with like psychic things. So I was terrified. But this woman that I was introduced to, like who had amazing energy, she was so clear, she was so kind, she was so loving. I'm like, oh, you got a reading done? Like, what does that entail? And she's like, I don't meet with people that like meet with the dead or communicate with the dead, but I do meet with someone who talks with my higher self. And I was like, well, what's your higher self? Right. So your higher self is your eternal self that's in the astral realm that never dies, that is essentially connected to your over soul, that chose this life and knows why you're here and knows exactly what's going on and why. So when I met with this woman that essentially like met with my higher self in the spirit realm, she said to me, she's like, God placed a kiss of protection on your forehead before you came into this human incarnation because he knew that you would need it. And then all of a sudden, I felt like my third eye opened and I had a clear vision of all of the ways that I could have been raped, abducted, murdered, kidnapped, like dead, like all the things and all the risks and all the things that happened to me didn't, obviously. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I was so protected from all of those other like horrible things. Granted, there was a lot, don't get me wrong, but it made sense to me, like why I had like this guardian angel. Um, and she also said that my higher being came down and she was wearing like this like robe and it was like glittering and it was glistening and she was like spinning and she was coming down and like throwing roses and she held out this scroll and like that went on for forever. And on this scroll was all of the things that I came here to work through in my life, where it was like intergenerational karma, codependency, addiction, not being feeling safe in love or being able to receive love, like all of these things that she didn't even have to say was on that list, but I intuitively knew what it was because we have connection, right? It is us that we're meeting with. And I got this confirmation of like, oh, okay, like this is real. This is right. It feels so right to me. And she started explaining to me that sometimes, like, I'm on, like, when I feel like I'm on the right path, I'm like up here and I'm rising high. And other times, this other ball of yarn is up. And I feel like I'm like, living in awful alignment and I'm harming myself and I'm abusing myself with alcohol and I'm doing these things that my soul doesn't want for me. But because they have free will choice, I get to do what I want. Right. But it's all this like internal battle and internal struggle that she started to describe to me. So it really opened my eyes to the concept of spirituality and the fact that I do have a higher being and that I am not here on an accident and I am on a very unique soul mission to do the work that I'm doing in the world now. And this is all part of a process that each individual gets to go through on your own unique soul's journey. So that started me on this path of more exploration, where I moved into the third phase of spiritual awakening. Now, the spiritual awakening would be what I would call the alchemy phase of your life, where you start to, your higher self, your soul starts to merge with the human self, and the ego fears and the ego shadows and all of that stuff starts to fade, where you then own that you are an embodied divine being on this earth plane, and you have these gifts that you developed earlier in your life because you want to serve humanity. You want to help them out of their suffering. You want to teach them that there is a different way. And whatever that means to you, it doesn't mean you have to be a coach. It doesn't mean you have to be a therapist. It doesn't mean you have to be anything, as far as like, it just means that you have to know what unconditional love is. And so in the spiritual activation phase, you're actually starting to receive the love of God or see the love of God through synchronicities. And in the spiritual awakening phase, you're starting to see the truth of what love really means. And instead of seeking love externally, you become the love that this world needs to see as a model, right? So, this is what Jesus described as being in the world, but not of it, right? I am the way, I am the truth, I am the light. And it is your own unique light and your own unique core soul frequency that you put out there in the world, which is unconditional love. In this phase, I was able to, work enough where spirit started to give me downloads to see how I am not separate from God and how I am unconditionally loved, not only by God, but by people, by humanity. Like, God wants me to receive all of the desires of my heart and wants me to be able to not only let all that love in and feel safe in my body being seen and feel safe receiving that from people, it's to be able to give that in my own unique way. So that's a very individual process for each person on their own unique path, right? And then we start to like raise our energy and we raise our consciousness to be a channel of divine love through connection to source, connection to spirit. And we start to have all these signs and synchronicities come in, and the world becomes this magical teaching place of like curiosity for us always to continue to do our inner work and communicate with the divine intelligence inside of us that is leading us in certain directions, towards certain people, towards certain jobs or places of interest or things that we love to do. That's always, always available. We start to see angel numbers during this phase, like constant infiltrations with angel numbers. You may have something in this phase called an ascension partner, which I will definitely talk about on another video, because I could go into a whole nother hour of what the ascension partner is and how that works. Mine was a twin flame. It completely activated me as far as like how I'm outsourcing my own masculine energy to an external masculine and looking for that person to save and rescue me. It came with deep wounding, deep abandonment stuff that came up, where you're forced to confront all the things inside of you that are keeping you feeling separate from the love of Christ. And it really is meant to help you wake up to your own internal world and align you with the desires of your heart, that for what you want to create and what you want to do in this world. Instead of it being like, God is something that I pray to that's separate than me. It's like, no, 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 no. The Holy Spirit is me and is in me. because I am made out of the stuff of God. I am made out of the particles of God. And I am always connected to that divine source through my heart. Right. So instead of being like, it's God that's giving this to me, it's like, no, 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 no. I am co creating as a child of God because I am made out of the gold of God and I get to be that light in the world that I was always destined to be for other people through my own wounding. Now, this is like higher level awareness and higher level expansion. So if you're not there yet, don't shame yourself. Don't judge yourself. If you've listened this far and if you're like, resonating with what I'm saying, this is where you're going because they call this unity consciousness. This is where the soul self merges with the human self or merges with your ego, and you start to see the oneness and how we are all interconnected and how we are all one race. And you start to understand that people in your life played the roles that they played so that you could ascend and that you could fulfill your purpose here on earth, right? That's where this actual first tattoo came from. It says, your web gave you wings. And I was on a nature walk in Sedona where I was instructed to go sit in nature for 2 hours with nothing but my water and let spirit speak to you. And so on my walk, I noticed, I was like, oh, interesting, little fawn prints, like little deer prints, right? So my biological father's name is actually Fawn. And I didn't talk to him for 10 years. And I was like, oh, he actually played this role for me to develop all this wounding around the masculine so that I could get to a place where I forgave the masculine and I embodied my own inner masculine energy so that I could let the masculine love of God into my heart again. So I had an incredible awareness that the men in my life, the women in my life that actually dumbed themselves down did that for me because they loved me. They on a like real quick is like their soul is so advanced, but they chose a lifetime to essentially like they sacrificed themselves for me. And yes, it looked like trauma and it looked like feelings of unworthiness the first half of my life, but now I can see how like my mother, she's an incredibly advanced being and so is my dad. You wouldn't say that in the human 3D realm, but in the spirit realm, they're really powerful beings. And they actually did what they did for me to get me to where I'm at right now. And that is what I can call like true forgiveness. When you can see the divinity and the gold in their soul, no matter how they're choosing to live on this earth plane, because you know it served you and you know the sacrifice they made for you on a soul level. Um, and it was so I saw the little fawn prints that came in, and then I was like sitting down on this rock, like staring at the sun, and this little spider was like weaving a web. And I was able to see like how every single thing in my life was intricately connected and how there was not one accident on my path from the people that came into it, for the people that saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, to the people that harmed me, for the men that tried to love me that I couldn't love back, for the men that abused me that I allowed to abuse me so that I could find my point of power and I could take my like power back. All of this played out beautifully and it was shown to me in a really unique way. And then I ended up actually sort of like dazing off, laying back. My knees were up at the sky. And when I came to, on the outside of my knees, perfectly in the clouds, there were these two angel wings right outside my knees. And I saw this hawk circling around and circling around. And it went up so far high into the clouds, into these angel wings until I couldn't see it anymore. And then the message that came through was, your web gave you wings. And a year and a half later, it was, so your phoenix child could rise and do the work that I'm doing in the world right now. Right. So that is how in touch you can get with nature, with spirit, with the world of form that is not real and is just an illusion for your soul to play in. Again, This is really high level advanced information. And I don't expect you to understand what it means yet if you're not there. I'm just planting the seed for you to know that you are on a path and that you are not an accident and that you are here to experience what you're experiencing because you are meant to light up your world. But you cannot do that until you find unconditional love and acceptance for yourself, right? I no longer carry shame for the things that I did in my life or for the things that happened to me or the debt that I accrued because I had to with student loans and all the bullshit of being a single mom. Like, I don't care about any of that anymore because I know that all of it was meant to get me to be able to use my voice and talk to you in the way that I'm talking to you right now, to give you hope, to know that you are not broken, to know that your trauma doesn't define you, and to know that we need you. We need you to heal yourself. We need you to love yourself. And we need you to wake up to the truth that you are not an accident in this world. And so I encourage you to stop looking at this world as a way to define your worth and look at it as a way to be your teacher. What is it teaching me? What does my soul want me to learn from this experience? How do I rise above this? In what ways am I constantly doubting myself, hating myself, yelling at myself, judging myself? That the inner adversarial voice uses, by the way, for you to step away and like take you out of alignment. And in another podcast, I actually had a download that we're going to talk about the 3 types of darkness that actually exist on this human plane that nobody talks about because who the hell knows, but it's there. And so that inner adversarial voice is actually a voice that's not yours, that is keeping you in condemnation and keeping you feeling like you're sinning or that you're not living right to keep you out of the path of love and to keep you away from the love of God that is your birthright. So I hope that you found a ton of this information valuable. If you are in any one of these phases, I encourage you to share it with me or share it with someone that you know. And I know that it can be a super lonely path to be on a spiritual journey. And the reason that it's actually such a lonely path is because you are meant to be able to trust yourself and the knowing that's coming through you without needing validation from the external world, to be able to use your voice and step into your power and whatever that looks like for you, so that you can know that no matter what you're doing or how you're living, you are loved beyond belief. And it is a process. And we are strategically placed as light workers to be in certain areas of the world right now because we're meant to do our unique work and shed our love in that specific area as the collective starts to wake up to the fact that this planet is messed up. We are not living like we are divine beings. And so we're moving into what's called 5D level of consciousness, which is closer to like the God consciousness or creator consciousness, where we're like one race, one love, one human like heart, one soul that beats as one to save the planet, to save ourselves, and to save our souls from the way that we've been living. So don't ever underestimate what you can do when you start to see yourself differently and start to see the people that you love differently too. If you need help with this, I have an amazing program called Breakthrough to Bliss. It is a 5-month intimate coaching container where we meet 3 times a week. We do breath work. You get access to me for all of your questions as you wake up to this spiritual path that you're on to heal your trauma, to heal your karma, to overcome self-doubt, to overcome self-judgment. I love doing this work. And so if that calls to you, feel free to apply on my website. You also can go to my website and download my free guide to dismantle the 3 most unhealthy beliefs that you have, or subscribe to my newsletter, and we could talk about other promotions and other things for you to deep dive, to journal on, to understand the things that are blocking you from your birthright of bliss. All of those things you can find on aliciakcoaching.com. And if not, I hope that I hear or that I see that you tune in for the next episode and that you hit that subscribe button and hit that like button and share this with someone you know. So, welcome to the spiritual path, and know that you are not alone on this journey. I love you, and I'm really excited to see where all of this takes you.